Hello everybody, welcome to my decision session, which is held in consultation with the Executive Member for Economy and Strategic Planning. First item, declarations of interest.
I think for completeness, although it is already on the council website, just to report I am a school governor at York High School, and I am involved with Acomb Traders Association, Acomb Alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nothing specifically to declare for me. Takes us to item 2, the minutes of my previous decision session, which is listed on pages 1 to 4, which actually was primarily about the Acomb and Westfield Neighbourhood Plan Forum, which you do probably have an interest to record. You're noting the minutes by consultation. But I'm happy to agree the minutes of that last meeting. I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Item 3, public participation. So we've got 2 registered speakers. First speaker, Gwen Swinburne, who there may have been an administrative issue. However, I'm using my discretion to allow you to speak for up to 3 minutes. I assume, therefore, on item 4, the Inclusive Growth Fund.
That's right. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment what a welcome paper this is to see in front of us. I mean, not least because I wasn't really very happy about the way the £600,000 had been allocated last year, but at least you've been able to retrieve £300,000. And each of these projects I've got looked absolutely spot on for what an inclusive growth budget should be spent upon. I was ever so pleased to see the 14 plus vocational training item in there, and also on the York Economic Partnership bubbling up again. I'm not quite sure how that will actually manifest itself in the end, but I just thought that was really good. And the other thing that I found really helpful was the way that the author, was it you, Simon, had linked through to all the linked reports that that he had referred to. Not many people do that, but you know, when you start digging around, it really makes it much easier. So the only question I really have is, because this is a fixed term fund, but moving forward, if these initiatives, I know 1 or 2 of them are for 3 years, but if these initiatives work out, will there be some kind of plan for or attempt to keep moving forward in the next 2 or 3 years with them? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll pick up your comments when we get to the agenda item.
Thank you.
Second public speaker is Councillor Pete Kilbane. And again, you'll know that you've got up to 3 minutes to talk to us, and you're very welcome.
Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to speak. And obviously we welcome money being diverted into inclusive growth, which we in Labour Group consider to be direct in the council's assets, the education and training that we can influence to create work opportunities for people who need it the most, and retaining wealth within our communities. But we're not sure that this report does that, with all due respect. So if we look at the Poverty Commission, again, it's a welcome initiative, but we don't know what's going to happen to the results, whether there's a long-term commitment to funding those recommendations, or if it is just going to be more talk. Community hubs, we again fully support, but we don't know how these drive inclusive economic growth. So we're not sure how providing advice in the social space for someone helps them get a well-paid job. If the intention is that community hubs will help people get well-paid jobs, then 40k is nowhere near enough for it. If that's not the intention, then we're not sure why the window dressing. Greening the estate, again, is admirable, but we're not entirely sure how a £70,000 survey of our business tenants promotes inclusive growth. The community jobs fairs are already happening, but obviously the money's run out, so we're actually using this fund to plug that hole. And again, we're not sure how this creates new inclusive growth. 14 plus vocational works great, you know, crack on. Let's hope the schools don't swallow it all up, but clearly getting somebody on a pathway at the age of 14 that's going to get them into a job that's going to get them into a well-paid job is to be supported. The Retail Growth Fund, I've got to say, as a member of a retail association, you know, if money is going to be diverted to retail associations, then full declaration. I'm sure most retail associations would love it. But I'm not entirely sure how that's going to create inclusive growth unless it's targeted and focused and it's part of an ongoing programme, and we weren't clear what was happening with that. On mental health, I mean, Good Health will be great support for local area teams and coordinators, I'm sure, and it'll be a great project. But again, we're not sure, we can't see anything from Good Health as to how they're going to get people into well-paid jobs, people who are struggling with mental health problems, etc. Spending money on the York Economic Strategy, well, you know, the Economic Strategy is an ongoing and live document. We want it to be focused on inclusive growth and community wealth building. You know, but developing a strategy is actually just the job of the council, and we shouldn't really be dipping into this pot to fund it. And it's not exactly a one-off consultation, an economic strategy. So in short, you know, all of these projects are worthwhile in themselves, but we don't think they're motors, as it stands, of inclusive growth. And we think some of this money is actually being used to plug holes in the budget and shore up your community spending. So at the very least, we think you should be honest in your intentions and maybe rename the report community spending and explain to people as to why you want to spend the money on these particular community projects, so that people can't accuse you of just spending it on pet projects. But actually,
I'm being quite tolerant on time.
Last sentence, but what we think you should do is rethink the whole thing and actually spend the money on projects that will actually drive inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, we'll pick up your comments when we get to the agenda item. So that then takes us on to agenda item 4, Inclusive Growth Fund update. I'm going to hand over to Simon to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you have before you a paper which does two things really. It sets out the first cut of our inclusive growth evidence base, and then goes through the detail of the projects that we discussed at your previous decision session in September, updates where we are, and seeks approval to spend money on the Projects Impact Fund. I stress the two sides of it because, of course, inclusive growth doesn't begin and end with this paper, as we've already touched on in some of the other work we've been doing around the economic strategy. Inclusive growth is going to be a very key strand of our emerging economic strategy, and the work that's in here gives a taste of the kind of things that we are looking at bringing forward in more detail, as well as helping the development of that economic strategy into something which is far more inclusive than previous documents we've had in York. So, as I say, the Annex A sets out our economic evidence base, which shows areas where we're doing well and also some of the challenges. I'm not proposing to go through in great detail now, but very happy to answer any questions that raises. We then go into an update on the development of the 8 projects that you considered in September. So, taking them briefly one at a time, the first of those projects is York Poverty Truth Commission. There is a group in the community attempting to take forward a Poverty Truth Commission using a model that's been developed supported by the Rowntree Foundation and piloted in Dundee and in Leeds. We're asking for a contribution to be allocated at this stage because that will help the group that's trying to develop the commission to raise the funding on elsewhere. It's an important principle of those Poverty Truth Commissions that they're not simply funded by one organisation and they're simply a council initiative. It needs to be something which is beyond simply what the council does. They're not at the stage of having a detailed proposal at the moment. They have a group that's developing that with support from the Rowntree Foundation. As I say, the recommendation is to make approve a contribution at this stage so that they can then go and seek the funding from elsewhere. But clearly that decision should be dependent on other funding appearing. The second project in the list is around community hubs, which are not a new initiative. Community hubs have been worked on for several years now. What we're seeking to do is expand out the work of those community hubs to try and link in better to economic outcomes, and also to try and use those community hubs and that community presence, particularly in some of the more deprived bits of York, as a way to help people from those communities contribute more in terms of the economic strategy and our thinking going forward as well. There's a set of 5 bullet points at paragraph 18 for the things that this particular investment in community hubs is trying to achieve. In terms of greening our commercial estate, this is work which we would seek to deliver through the
I'll take over.
Yeah, do you want to talk about this one, Tracy?
Yeah, the fund will be used to do an initial survey to identify where green energy and sustainability measures can be applied across our commercial estate, which will then give benefit to the tenants of those properties. So the first bit is the survey to understand the possible, and then we'll have a programme of work to start implementing that, and the remainder of the funding will be used for that, and rethinking how our leases with tenants might reflect the benefit of that and enable them to benefit from the cost-effective measures that would accrue from that.
Thank you. The next one on the list is the community job fairs. These have been run for a number of years, but what we want to do is increase the degree of monitoring and evaluation and make sure that these job fairs really are helping local residents into work, and also to give some longevity to the funding so that we can be sure that they can run for a number of years, so that they can become more clearly part of the local landscape where they're happening. The 14 plus vocational training and work, there's been some good work being developed by the Secondary Heads and Principals Forum, looking at the possibilities around this. Now, the £50,000 that we're proposing here is actually, in terms of school budgets, is a relatively modest amount of funding. What's been proposed is a pilot for some work. The detail is yet to come forward, and therefore we're proposing in the paper here that the money's made available but is subject to further approval from a combination of yourself and the Corporate Director of Children Education and Communities. So the detailed proposal is still being developed, but there's a hope, I think there's still time to get forward a proposal which can enable young people who are making their choices for next academic year to make that happen from next academic year.
I think that's a key.
Yeah.
That in order, I understand it's progressive visually, that options can be taken in March for courses that start in September.
It was almost ready to put into this paper, but just not quite. So there is a proposal which can come very quickly.
I'm very keen to keep people on track.
I know, and indeed, as I'm sure you can imagine, the secondary heads are keen for something to come forward as well.
It's important to make sure the provision that comes out of that is actually relating to the skills that will get people a job, and it's linked into our economic strategy as well.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, the Retail Growth Fund is partly a response to the challenges that small shopkeepers face, but I think also recognises the importance of shopping areas and retail areas as centres for the community as well. So in terms of helping traders to have a better connection with their local communities, that will help, we hope, both in terms of making sure that they're delivering services that their local residents want, and also making sure that those shops remain open. We want to work through traders' associations to avoid investing in particular shops. There is a set of criteria at Annex B that we're proposing for how that fund would work, but looking to run a fund over the next few months, certainly as a first round, to see where we get to with that. The seventh project is mental health, wellbeing and employment. Again, this is a proposal to match fund into another piece of work which the local area coordinator team want to make to a scheme that Nestor are running in terms of good help places. I know that fits in closely with the priorities of that team and broader council strategy as well. The bidding round has not yet opened up, so there's but we're hoping that we can make an allocation so that it's clear that there is funding to put into that. The link between health and well-being and employment again comes through in some of the other evidence that we put together that's not actually presented here, but we've done some strong work on inclusive growth with the Health and Wellbeing Board, and mental health has come through as a very strong theme within that. And then finally, the York Economic Strategy and Partnership. In order to make sure that we do develop the economic strategy as a fully inclusive way as possible, we're actually asking for a little more allocation. The allocation that's here is slightly more than we were talking about in September. We recognise that we want to use the learning that's been developed in My Castle Gateway, My York Central and Northern Ireland City Centre consultation to make sure as many opportunities as possible for residents in general to get engaged with the process, but we also, because there's a strong inclusive growth strand to the economic strategy, we want to make sure that the starting point is the real lived experience of those people that we want to try and help most within the strategy, and making sure that we go and hear what those people have to say is very important, and need some resource to make sure it's done as well as possible. So, in summary, those are the 8 projects. The allocations are set down at paragraph 30. Some of those projects are ready to start now. Some of them are awaiting further information before they can really get going. In terms of the balance between this year and next year, for instance, there's 300,000 there. Our estimate is that about 100,000 of that will get spent this year, and the remainder will go through into next year and beyond. We're asking for approval for that list of approved projects so that we can go ahead and commission with, to say, with the exception of the 114 Plus project, which we are recommending that a further decision is made between Corporate Director for Children Education and Communities and yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comprehensive introduction to the paper. So we've got the recommendations on pages 5 and 6, which I'll go to Councillor Waller in a second. But just say, broadly, obviously welcome the fact that both public speakers welcome the broad thrust of the proposals, and I'm obviously pleased that we're in a position to be able to make these allocations to inclusive growth, having reprioritised some previous decisions from the business rates pool away from branding and marketing onto projects that will have more of an immediate impact on inclusive growth and in communities. Councillor Kilbane asked some questions about how things would develop and be implemented. I'm sure you could ask, or will have asked, or Simon would be more than happy to meet with you as an officer to answer all of those types of questions on implementation. And just one particular sort of priority area for me, actually there's a question on the community jobs fairs in paragraph 21. That presumably is specifically to fund the community jobs fairs, i.e. the one in Acomb, because obviously as an administration we put funding for the York IR city centre ones into the budget.
Yeah, it's focused on the community.
So we just So if you're not aware, just check that that's
Make
funding
sure that
for the
not
community
double funding
jobs
it.
fairs,
Yes.
as opposed to
Certainly
ensuring those city centre ones.
It does mention the Railway Institute in that paragraph, but the main thrust has been on
Community
Acomb
jobs fairs
and
rather than
Burnholme and elsewhere. And I know one of the challenges is finding good venues to do.
So I think
events outside
so.
the city.
My question to go back on is, as you say,
Okay.
if that's not just Acomb, but Acomb
Yeah.
and Burnholme, obviously that doesn't actually say that.
No.
But just my understanding of that paragraph would have been that that 30k would be used in essence for the non-city centre jobs fairs out in those communities. But perhaps if you could
I will
clarify.
confirm that that's your decision back to the York Learning who were running them. So,
well, just to get
so I'll
further
need
clarification.
in terms of passing money on and setting them around. I said we want to try and make sure that there's more detailed monitoring, so there will be an agreement that will be in place between my team and their team, basically, about what's happening and what is to be spent on and what the information we'll want back.
Thank you. And then obviously for me, the particular section around the economic strategy and York Economic Partnership, so obviously references a previous decision session of Councillor Waller, but I do think that it's an important area where post Without Walls and strategic partnerships, understandably, a lot of partners felt that we were just following ourselves around the city, spending a lot of time in meetings. On the other hand, you don't want a distance between what the council's doing in terms of economic strategy in both big and small businesses, and particularly businesses are not public sector representatives. So I do think over the year, as stated here, it's important that we have that forum and get them involved with it as soon as possible.
So our plan is, as part of the business strand of our economic strategy consultation, one of the things we want to talk to businesses about is what would a good partnership look like to them, and what are the kind of issues that they would like to raise in such a forum, to make sure that we're designing something that's fit for purpose and isn't just a standing committee.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you. Just a few comments and questions. Thank you, Simon, for bringing this forward. I think it's important to ensure that there's evidence for future policy making. We realise that is quite an old-fashioned. Looking at national politics, that seems to be quite an old-fashioned concept. But I think in order to bring forward budget proposals for the following financial year, it's important to have the opportunity which has been provided by this. The community hubs, the success of those has been the continuity of them. The one at Sanderson House has been running for 2 years, and it's now beginning to bear fruit. So it's important that those are extended, and there are many more connections than there used to be. And it's harking back to the Westfield project of a decade ago, which I've engaged with York St John in terms of the monitoring of the outcomes for that, which with their new post holder, Mark Fleeton, who is doing that work through York St John. It connects the council with that. So I think it's important that to continue. Greening our commercial estates is an issue dear to my heart, and of course it would be recognising that many of our commercial properties are in conservation areas, and therefore we will have some skin in the game in terms of resolving some of the planning process issues. But I think it's important that we've got that to make things happen. Community jobs fairs, the ones that I've seen at Acomb have been very well received. I think having it in the middle of the community has brought the people forward, and it was interesting talking to the people seeking employees as to the pressures that they were facing within the York economy. So that's a very useful aspect. In terms of, I've asked some questions about the 14 to 16 vocational training. Again, that's something I tried to get the city region to take on board, and was told, it had to feed into their 2-year-long skills commission. So actually getting on and doing it, this has speeded things up dramatically. And I'm conscious that there has been a lot of work done, and I'm grateful to York College for really embracing this. And some of the people involved were involved with vocational training at this age group the last time it was run, and was a very positive option for some pupils, and schools recognise that. So, and I acknowledge that since the last meeting, all the money hasn't just been allocated to York High School. It's been spread around.
It's a relatively modest amount of money, but I think by trialling this in this way, we can try and model for the rest of the school community how a pooling of budgets in future years might help to spread that across the city.
But without this, it wouldn't happen because budgets are very...
And in terms of the scale, we're talking probably about 12 pupils in a pilot. But coming from lots of different schools, and all of the heads seeing the benefit of actually giving a bit of their budget into something else, which is a helpful way forward.
I think the independent retail group, that's been covered. So just in terms of the economic strategy, I think that we've talked in the past about a model similar to the Future York report in terms of making sure that partners around the city are very much feeding into that with their own thoughts, and that whilst we are holding the ring, it is a citywide view, and that was certainly a report that didn't just sit on the shelf collecting dust. It delivered a lot, and was very forward thinking in its inclusivity, which was reassuring to see. So that's certainly the model that this will enable to develop.
And the allocation of this budget will enable us to do that in-depth conversation with people who are experiencing in-work poverty or are stuck in a part-time economy, have other caring responsibilities, a whole range of families and personal situations, which means that they're not benefiting from the flow down of increased job growth or well-paid jobs. So it's really about understanding that territory and being able to devise strategies going forwards that will actually make a difference to those people.
So I think the final point is how these will be monitored going forward.
Absolutely, and there's not one blanket answer to that. Essentially, we've got 8 separate projects here. I've pointed, the Poverty Commission needs to come forward with a more detailed proposal. One of the things we will absolutely be monitoring is how they manage to get the match funding from anywhere else, because without that it's not a success at all. But then beyond that, we'll need to develop the proposal with them. In terms of the community hubs, we need to develop some more clearer monitoring. I mean, there was an evaluation of the community hubs that I think came to full council, wasn't there? So continuing the work that they've already shown that they're doing on evaluation and making sure that we tie into economic outcomes.
And wanting to use community hubs as part of that community engagement aspect of the economic strategy consultation.
Yeah, so there's to the degree to which they help us be more inclusive, and the economic strategy will be part of that. Greening our retail estate, we'll sort the detail out on exactly how we'll monitor that once we've got people in post to actually do that work. But Tracy touched on the things that we're hoping we're going to achieve in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of our buildings, but also helping with the costs of running businesses in those buildings as well, and helping those businesses to be more sustainable. The community jobs fairs I've talked about, making sure that we know how many people are coming along to those, what they think of it on the day, but actually far more important, to what extent are they then finding work after those job fairs as well. The purpose is for them is to help people find jobs after all. The 14 plus pilot, again with the detail in terms of monitoring and evaluation, will be something that will be touched on in the proposal that will be brought to you in due course. The Independent Retail Growth Fund, I've set out in the criteria of what we're trying to achieve. It will be we'll be seeking projects from either groups of retailers that want to set up a traders association or existing traders association, and the monitoring for each of those projects will depend on what they want to do, but rest assured it will be built into the funding agreements. The mental health projects, as I say, we're still waiting for the bidding criteria to come forward for that. That will be a much larger piece of work, and there will be detailed monitoring in that. And the economic strategy on one level will be judged by the extent to which we are inclusive in terms of that consultation, but we'll have some metrics around that. So perhaps set out in broad terms how we might monitor each of those. We would then need to bring back, I would suggest, a report to a future decision session for an update in terms of what's been achieved as well as what's been spent.
Okay. Thank you very much. So recommendations listed on page 5 and 6. I think we can amend then the first recommendation that talks about noting the progress. So noting the progress, and a future report will be provided to ensure outcomes against the required spend. So if we don't specify a time frame for that, because obviously it will depend on the different projects, but we'll put that into the so an amended recommendation 1, which is obviously noting progress, and bringing back a future report on some outcomes. 2, to approve the commissioning of those projects as out in paragraphs 11 to 28, and that delegation of the issue about vocational training and work. So I'm very happy to agree those recommendations as amended, which then takes us on to item 5, urgent business. As far as I'm aware, there is no urgent business, so thank you all very much.